Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this fine Thursday afternoon webinar. I know you all are really excited. We are for sure. So we are EdSystems Education Systems Center at Northern Illinois University, and we're going to be discussing some work we've been doing on career pathway quality criteria. Our agenda for the day, we're going to give a little bit of background on why we're doing this, what the process was, and some key decisions we made along the way. And then we're going to share some of the component examples as well as next steps. The goal for the end of the day is to set you up for success, to interact with the frameworks and give quality insights. And a few logistics for the day as well. Try to keep yourself on mute when you're not speaking. And if you have any comments or questions, we have a lot of team members here that are able to answer those questions and send to the chat. And if you need clarification or anything or need to get our attention, then use the raise hand function or just use the chat. So introducing the team, we're going to go from left to right, starting with Juan Jose.
Hi, everyone. I'm Juan Jose Gonzalez, Managing Director of Pathways and Operations here for EdSystems.
I'm Emily Ruska. I'm Managing Director of Policy and Programs here at EdSystems. Happy to see lots of familiar faces and some new ones too.
Hi, everybody. My name is Laura Monagudo, and I am Policy and Program Manager here with EdSystems, and I'm excited to share what we've been working on with y'all today.
My name is Liam Lawson. I am the Pathways Fellow. And yeah, really excited to be here on this team and working on this project and be presenting to all of y'all today. So our mission, we want to shape and strengthen education and workforce systems to advance racial equity and prepare more learners for productive careers and lives in a global economy. And one second, my headphone just fell. There we go. So quickly in the chat, we want to get to know you. If you can just share your name, your organization, what your role is, and how did you decide on your current career path? We'll take 2 minutes to do that really quick. So we've got superintendent, trial and error, stumbled into it, found it by accident. I feel like there's a theme arising. Career advisory, coordinator, director of development communications, fell into my current career path. Love it. All right, 30 more seconds. Go ahead and get that in the chat if you haven't yet. Awesome. I love the diversity of roles and organizations, but also the journeys to get to those roles and organizations. So I'm going to pass it on to Laura. She's going to give us a quick background and a few of our goals.
Yes. Hi, everybody. I relate to a lot of you with just kind of by chance. I got my first job out of college because person I went up to at the college fair at the career fair looked nice. And so I went up to them just to talk to them for practice because they look nice. And I ended up working in the ISAC Corps because of that. So definitely by chance, sometimes just happens how it's supposed to happen. So today we are going to be talking to you about quality criteria for career pathways. And career pathways have been a really large piece of the state landscape in Illinois when it comes to college and career readiness and our approaches to that. And the 2016 Post-Secondary Workforce Readiness Act sets up the College and Career Pathway Endorsement as a statewide framework. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what the endorsement contains, but just since 2016, this endorsement has really been spreading throughout the state. In the class of 23, over 1,000 students completed this endorsement. And you can see that it's really growing. It was a big increase from the previous year. And part of this is in push from recent legislation that's been kind of pushing school districts to develop and offer this endorsement or opt out. So you can really see it growing, and you'll notice if you look at the map that it's covering, a wide array of communities across the state that have been working on this framework and offering it to their students. So you'll see it's covering urban, suburban, rural school districts. It's comprehensive pathways that also connect to some of the CTE work that's been happening on the state. So it's really kind of one of the main frameworks that exists statewide that's going to be relating and connecting to the work that we're sharing with you all today. If we go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit more about this framework and say that ISB, Illinois State Board of Education, they set kind of the administrative rules and guidance around what it means and what is required to apply for and get authorized to offer this college and career pathway endorsement. In September, they released some proposed rules to kind of make even clearer what those requirements are for the college and career pathway endorsement. Since it's been through public comment, it's pending approval, those rules. But at EdSystems, we really appreciate the rules that were proposed in the fall. If you want to know, what some of that is in terms of, what we think will offer more clarity for, folks who are working on developing these pathways. You can check out the blog. It's linked in the slides, which will be shared. And then kind of along the note of that, the fact that the Illinois State Board of Education is setting these rules and guidance, it's just something to note that the college and career pathway endorsement is already a quality pathway, especially when we compare it to national models around the country. So the resources that we're going to be sharing with you all are kind of to take that next step for folks who really want to look at how do we make this even more robust for our students. So if we move on, we can talk about the purpose of our work in developing this quality criteria. We wanted to focus on refinement, right? So with all the expansion that's been happening around college and career pathways in the state, there were a lot of communities that were doing really innovative practices, getting creative, doing things in the process of seeking authorization and implementing both the college and career pathway endorsement and just other CTE programs. And we wanted to draw those people together, look at those models. We started with quite a bit of research to see, what are the practices that are happening around the state, around the country, what does that look like? And we brought together a diverse group of stakeholders, really paying attention to, diverse geographically, diverse demographically, but also in who we're talking to. So making sure that we were focusing on people in all stages of implementation, making sure we were including not just the same old people all the time, making sure that we were including varying district sizes, so small or rural districts, large unit districts, folks from the post-secondary space, folks from workforce space, and we wanted to develop a key frame of these innovative practices so that folks who were working on pathways or who have been working on pathways in the state for quite a bit can look at this resource from another lens. So if the pathways have been developed, how can folks look at continually improving those pathways, making sure that it's an even more robust opportunity for students, and also ensuring equitable access to pathways in some new creative ways. So we tried to work with the group to highlight those pieces and pull them all in together into a framework that will be available as a resource that we're gonna kind of walk through some of the process we developed and what's in that with you all today. So just for reference, some of you may be familiar with this already. This is the state's college and career pathway endorsement framework. So this is kind of our starting point for the criteria we developed, was what is required under this framework. So you'll see it has kind of 4 main components: the individualized plan, or, you know, students looking at different options in terms of understanding career goals, educational goals, financial aid, those types of things. Professional learning we'll actually skip over for a moment. And then we have career focused instructional sequence. So that would be 2 years of coursework, typically dual credit, but we'll talk a little bit more about what career focused instruction looks like in this quality criteria. And then academic readiness, so preparing students for college level coursework. Now, the reason that I skipped over professional learning is actually because there is a parallel advisory committee that is covering all things work-based learning. That's such a big part of pathways that in order to make sure it got the intention, the discussion that it needed, there's a parallel group that was been working on that with their own advisory committee. They've been doing similar work in terms of exploring innovations and practices. And they have put together some resources that are also coming out very shortly. So if you're interested in learning about that component, their public comment is going to start April 29th, and they will also be having a webinar on April 29th. So if you want to learn about that piece and kind of see how it all connects, April 29th will be when the work-based learning piece is going to be shared with everyone in a webinar. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is hand it off for a few minutes to actually one of our advisory members. So Patty Zuccarello is a CCPE coordinator at Three Rivers Education for Employment System. Trees always trips me up. I'm really happy that I got it right there in front of me. But Patty, I'll hand it off to you. We asked Patty just to share a little bit of what it was like to be on the advisory group, and then also kind of how she sees these criteria helping the work in her local area.
Thanks, Laura. And for those of you not familiar with Trees, Trees works with the districts that are in Will and Grundy counties. So kind of southwest of Chicago, Joliet metro region. We have multiple schools ranging in size from small districts, small schools, to districts that have probably some of the largest enrollments in the state in terms of secondary students. So it's quite the range. We also have 2 career centers. So when we started working with folks about 2 years ago to work with the ISB process for pathway endorsements, we realized there were some pieces that were a little bit murky. So when EdSystems said that they were doing this framework, we were very pleased to participate in it, just to sort of think through how the different pieces intersect, especially when we think about pathways, the kind of freedom that you get in a post-secondary environment versus a secondary environment is a bit different. So thinking about how to talk about that inside the framework and which pieces were most impacted by that kind of information, I thought was really kind of a big piece of it. For us also thinking about what does a basic pathway look like? What does something that's kind of more an intermediate model and what does a more advanced model look like was really helpful for us. Because again, with the ISB model, it states kind of the bar you need to meet, but it doesn't include a lot about kind of what a more robust version might look like. So especially I think for us, for our career centers, especially that additional piece and thinking through kind of what does a more robust version look like is pretty helpful for us. I think also once we, as an advisory member, figured out if we connected what we were doing to the requirements, not just looking at the ISB endorsement structure, but also thinking about the program of study structure and designing a document that is a way to kind of interconnect these two pieces was a huge value add. I can't overstate that enough, because this then becomes kind of the unifying element between these different pieces that sometimes feel like they're floating out there in these bubbles without a bridge connecting them. So I really feel like this framework does that for us. In terms of how we hope to really use the framework, one of the things we're hoping is that this is going to be something that helps us build consistent pathways across the region. Like I said, we have a lot of diversity in terms of how our institutions and districts are structured. So having, again, some unification is really helpful. We also do have some districts that are planning to opt out of the ISB model. So having another model for us to point to and work around, I think is going to be very helpful there too. But again, this idea of kind of promoting consistency across the region so that we agree as a region, this is kind of where we want to go. And also having a tool that we can use to have conversations with our post-secondary partners, I think is going to be another element that's very helpful, that it's not just talking about these pieces are just what individual institutions want, but when we think about what's best practice and what pathways should include, to be able to get the post-secondary folks on the same page as the secondary folks, I think is going to be another great benefit of using the framework. And again, like giving us that language that allows us to all sing the same song about what pathways should include, instead of everybody kind of having slightly different iterations of what that looks like. I think all of those pieces are really huge benefits that come out of this process. Plus, just for me personally, getting to just pick other people's brains about what they're doing and how they see this rolling out in their regions was really valuable and helped to inform some of the practices that we're looking at in our region now too. So back to you, Laura.
Thank you, Patty. That was, I think, very helpful for folks to hear. I think we're going to move on to a little bit more information about some of the key decisions and the process we went through with the advisory committee developing this framework. The first of which being what we are referring to as a continuum of practice. So I feel like Patty gave some hints at kind of what's coming up and some of the things that she said. So one of the choices that we made kind of when we were starting this process of developing the criteria was we wanted to find a way to distinguish criteria by sort of where folks were in the process of implementing and developing their pathways. So what we ended up with was kind of three main categories. We have the first category being implementing. Now, the criteria that would fall in this category are kind of the baseline. So this is either things that are required for the college and career pathway endorsement or just aligned to support those other baseline pieces. So, you know, a lot of that is things that are part of that ISB authorization process, but also some other things that are just pretty fundamentally related to those requirements. And then the second piece is refining. So this is for maybe districts that have had an endorsement for a little bit, but are looking at, you know, making some regular revision, looking at how they can improve or make the pathway more equitable. So this is kind of the next step in making pathways even more robust. And then our third category is advancing, which is kind of the model practices, the really innovative things that maybe take a little bit longer, but are for folks who really want to make sure that their pathway is continuing to grow in ways that are benefiting the students and the individuals completing them. So that is our continuum of practice. Kind of built into the framework as well are two other pieces. So while we were working with our advisory committee, we had quite a bit of conversation around both these pieces, which is equitable practices and continuous improvement. So when it came to equitable practices, we really wanted to center equity and, you know, criteria to help folks who are looking to ensure that their pathways are not only available, but access is equitable. And so we had some conversations about what does it look like to incorporate that. We wanted to make sure it got the attention it deserved, but we also wanted to make sure that it didn't seem like something that we just kind of tagged on. So what we decided to do, partially by the suggestion of our advisory group, was embed the equitable practices throughout. So we have different components, which I'll talk to you about in a moment. But for each component, we have embedded a specific section that talks about what equitable practices look like in that particular area. We did a similar approach with continuous improvement. So in the particular area, what does it look like to be thinking about continually making these pathways better and more robust? So those are embedded within the frameworks and the components, which I believe is the next piece. So defining the components. So we knew we wanted to, after doing a lot of research, we saw some of the models that really appealed when it came to developing quality criteria were almost like rubrics. So kind of having those 3 different phases on the continuum, but also, you know, specifying more in detail about different specific categories or components. So we talked with our advisory group. We looked at the CCPE framework and kind of looked at those pieces aside from work-based learning and thought about how we could incorporate those pieces as the components. And then again, by suggestion of members of our advisory group, we decided to work with the state's Perkins CTE programs of study quality criteria, so that we could align to some of the other pathway related things that were already happening and already existing, kind of in the same realm in the state. So we did that. So these categories align to those CTE programs of study, and these are the main components for the framework. So each one of these components has a table or a rubric, if you will, that goes even further into some subcategories and lays out criteria within those 3 pieces of a continuum of practice. So for development and engagement, or for instructional sequence, there are criteria that will show what it looks like to implement an instructional sequence versus what it looks like to refine versus what it looks like to advance. So that's how we defined the components and kind of came up with the form of what this framework was going to be. With this, I think I'll hand it to Liam to kind of finish up this portion.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura. That was a marathon of slides, so appreciate you. So the process that we took, we wanted to make sure it was robust and thorough. In October, we announced the kickoff of the project, and we wanted to make sure, and that was the piece that Laura was talking about, making sure that we had people from a diverse regions and roles and organizations at different stages of pathway implementation. And once we did that, we kind of formed our advisory committee and presented 2 frameworks at a time. And in that process, we discussed our process for forming each framework and each quality criteria, as well as how each breakout room was going to approach each framework. And after that, so after the breakouts were done, we gathered feedback via survey and took a couple weeks to synthesize that feedback and find ways to implement it. And there were 2 main ways we were going to implement that. First, if it was going to go directly into the rubric content, so if it was going to fall into one of those categories of implementing, refining, or advancing, or should it be something that's addressed in supplemental resources, which I'll talk about in a second. So we did that all the way up through March, and now we are here, April, in the for the webinar for the public comment period, and really excited to hear what you all have to say. So for the resources, one of the biggest goals is just to make sure that there is more support at every level and addressing as many areas that we can. So we decided that we wanted to keep track of different tables or examples or frameworks to keep in mind as we were developing these frameworks, things that will be helpful as people are trying to implement them themselves. And I know everyone's been really excited to see what these actually look like. This is a row taken from the development and engagement criteria. And you'll see at the top, there is a bit of a description section. And then in the left column, it tells you what row is being focused on, what area of focus. And then you have the three columns: implementing, refining, and advancing. And the idea is that each point will grow kind of in intensity as well as robustness. So if we look at the second point in implementing, so it's identification of post-secondary partners for dual credit and pathway continuation. The goal was that this would be aligned with endorsement authorization. But as it moves on to refining, it's not just identification of these partners, it's frequent meetings with these partners and targeting programs to compare research on industry trends. So there's more of a closer relationship and more interaction between partners. And then as you move on to advancing, it gets to the point where employer partners are invested and coming to pathway administrators with that information. And they're the ones initiating these different opportunities, and they're bringing research, jobs, ideas, innovative practices. And it really starts to become a cycle of iteration and implementation. And then if you look at the bottom there, that's the row that Laura was talking about. So equitable practices, these are points that cut across all three levels of implementing, refining, and advancing. And then what's not seen here is the continuous improvement. So it will look similar to equitable practices in terms of layout and location, but just didn't have enough room to fit it there.
Sorry, I lost my cursor for a moment. Yeah, another example table that we are sharing with you today is this row from the academic instruction and support criteria. So this particular row is about that academic readiness component. So you'll see, again, we have the three kind of pieces from the phases from the continuum across the top. But you'll see there is kind of a progression with the criteria there. So, you know, the first criteria, core courses that students are taking prepare them for non-remedial work through criteria that are defined by the school district or their partner community college. Also, course enrollment that aligns with the school's district accelerated placement policy. So these are pieces, again, that are in some way aligned or required under the baseline for the endorsement. And then steps further, so refining. So an example for refining, that's like taking it a little bit further of not just core courses that are preparing them for non-remedial coursework in reading and math, but core courses that are integrating other essential employability skills or competencies. So the example that we use, but this is not by far not the only example, is a geometry course that incorporates construction. And then advancing, kind of taking it one step further, something that is not necessarily required, but an improvement, making it more robust, is student enrollment in math coursework that's aligned with their career interests. So kind of along the idea of math pathways and weaving those into the endorsement, the pathway programs. And then again, throughout, we have this equitable practices piece. So when it comes to academic readiness, an example of an equitable practice that we thought fit in here was this idea of transitional math and transitional English courses being the default option for students who aren't enrolling their senior year in early college credit courses. So this is an example of a practice that we saw some folks doing around the state that really helps with increasing equitable access to college level courses. So that was one example of the types of things we were looking for and thinking about as we were building out those equitable practice rows. Something that is not depicted here just because this is just one row of the table, but that I mentioned before is that at the bottom of each of these tables, there is that component about continuous improvement. So for example, if someone was looking to see how can we continue to improve on our academic instruction and support, it would be criteria related specifically to gathering feedback, making assessment, making changes based on that feedback as it relates to instruction and support specifically. So we have that along with each particular table. I think, do we want to do next steps and then questions, or should we do questions and then next steps?
Let's do questions first.
Does anyone have questions? I will say, while we kind of leave the floor a little open for questions, we did not dive too deep into the specifics of the criteria and the framework today because we really want you all to be able to spend some time with it and offer feedback through our public comment process. So, you know, we know that there's you'll see when you look at the downloaded criteria, there's a lot that we are not going in depth on today, but it's really robust. We really wanted to make something that was robust and covering kind of all of the key components. So we fully understand that you may have questions about what's in the criteria that we just haven't gotten to today.
There's a question in the chat. In your smaller, more rural schools where there are teacher shortages for dual credit, how do you see these courses being offered? Dual credit enrollment is an option, but because of cost, it can be inequitable.
Yes, I think that's something that we would look for kind of some exemplary practices from you all who have seen it. We're starting to see, obviously, in rural communities, some dual credit in the career technical education courses be offered to a local career center, or the kind of sharing of resources across multiple districts to share a professor or share an adjunct faculty who can kind of distribute that opportunity across multiple school districts and make it more affordable. It's something that we're looking to document. Most of the experience that we're seeing from our rural partners is through the use of the Career Center, who has close ties to the community college and is able to serve a lot of districts in that space. There's obviously going to be difficulty in those courses when it comes to the general education courses, English, math, science, social science, but there is also the pathway endorsement and our general practices of early college allow for AP also to substitute in some of those II and general education courses. So we acknowledge that challenge. We know that there's not a perfect model. There's also kind of some exploration potentially happening with online and hybrid models, but I think that there's not a lot of state universities doing that in our state. So I can't really share that as an exemplary or model practice currently, but if there's some follow-up about some IT courses that we can share within state institutions, I have those examples. We can share that as well.
And just to note that, in the document itself, there's going to be notes about kind of equitable practices around these different things. And you'll see resources that we've already linked. And if you see a gap, as you're going through the public comment survey, if you see a gap in a particular type of resource or insight, like those that Juan Jose was just describing, please definitely make note of that. And we'll do our best to cultivate resources and guidance that can help support thought on that work.
Thank you, Juan Jose and Emily. Cassie, I see you have a hand raised.
I was just wondering, did the Illinois State Board of Ed or the Illinois Community College Board fund this project? Was this done out of one of their requests or a joint request from them?
This was funded through private philanthropy, actually. And ISB was involved with the advisory committee. We definitely coordinated closely with them as we went through the process to make sure that they were in alignment. ICCB was less involved in the process, but we had post-secondary represented in the group.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Cassie. Any more questions?
Yeah, hi guys. I was wondering, I was reading about the career development flexibility updates and thinking about maybe some frameworks or exemplars that might be really helpful as we kind of push our understanding of what internships look like these days. Internal internships, hybrid, that sort of thing. And I noted that that was listed in the updates, the proposed updates, and I just wondered if what anyone's thoughts were on that.
So I'm going to direct you to the work-based learning group that has been focused just very explicitly on that. And Heather and Danya from our team are on the line here, and they've been leading that work and doing an incredible job. So the webinar that will be on the 29th, launching those quality criteria, is focusing completely on work-based learning. We did not focus in on work-based learning in this group because we knew that what group was sort of happening in parallel. And there's tons of resources, to Heather's point, I see in the chat, around quality and robust work-based learning experiences. So appreciate the comment, because it is such an essential part of Pathways, and we didn't want to shortchange it, but definitely plan to join for next Monday to learn more about the really detailed work that they've been doing in the work-based learning space.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that resource, Heather.
Thank you, Carolyn. Any other quick questions? Nope. Okay. Feel free to send a message over to us if something does come up, or you can also just throw it into the public comment. So first of all, thank you everyone for your time and everyone who's been a part of this process. We know your time is valuable. Yeah, we know your time is valuable, so we really appreciate it. Next steps, we want to incorporate the feedback from this public comment period, and then publish the resource. So we ask that you share with with either partners or people in your network or different agencies as much as possible. It really helps. And then next steps, homework for you is to download the draft criteria and then submit any comments by May 27th. And strengths, any changes or additions you think should be made. And if you have any resources or model practices, those would be awesome. And if you can incorporate these resources into your work, great as well. And as Emily mentioned, the work-based learning criteria webinar is on April 29th. So mark your calendar and please attend that as well.